Yeah, Deeds, Oren here. Today I'm doing something a little different. I am doing a mock draft of one of the Detroit Lions rivals in the NFC North, the Green Bay Packers. Now, you might ask, why would you do this for another team? Well, when it comes to the NFL draft, uh, like it or not, it's important to keep tabs on what those that are the biggest threat to your success are up to because they may try to, trade up and try to get the players that you want so that you are less likely to succeed and that sort of thing. And they might visit and try to draft the same players that you uh, for your team that you'd want. So I know there are Packer fans last year who accused the Lions of doing that when they traded up with another division rival, the Minnesota Vikings, and drafted Jamison Williams. So I'll talk about a little bit of that in a minute. But like I said, it's important to keep track of what these other teams are doing. And I did a lot of basic research last night, trying to kind of figure out what the Packers are after and what they're doing because it's actually quite challenging to kind of get a gauge on like what they plan to do because the majority of the focus on that team this offseason has been trying to trade Aaron Rodgers to the New York Jets. So, God, I can't believe I said that guy's name. But what I found out, and I just kind of searched through the visits tracker of NFLTradeRumors.co, as well as reading some articles on The Athletic about the Packers and a little bit of research on PFF. What I found out is they are meeting with all the top tight ends because they seemed pretty obvious that they want to address that position. And it looks like they need help at safety and then maybe a little bit of depth at defensive line. They do need help at wide receiver, but as far as I can tell, they've only met with one, and they appear to covet one wide receiver, and that would be Jackson Smith-Njigba. So here's one other note that I want to make about the Packers GM, Ryden Gutekunst, aka Goody. This is something I kind of pieced together ever since last year's draft, and I believe this is going to factor into a lot of what I do. But my point is this: Mr. Gutekunst is a very spiteful person when it comes to his job. Last year, when the Detroit Lions traded up with the Minnesota Vikings, another division rival, and drafted Jamison Williams, I believe Mr. Gutekunst was so angry at that he reached for a player named Quay Walker, somebody who was projected to go in the third round, sometimes in the second round, and drafted him in the first round because he believed that the Detroit Lions really coveted Quay Walker because Quay Walker played with the Lions coaches during the Senior Bowl and they had a top 30 visit with him. And they figured, oh, you're getting a player we covet in Jamison Williams. We'll take a player that you covet at one of your biggest positions in need at linebacker. And I do think that was his mindset with that. Not only that, but Mr. Gutekunst drafted two defensive players from Georgia as an attempt at psychological warfare against Jamison Williams because it's basically saying, hey, Jamison Williams, remember these two Georgia players that were involved in that championship game where you had that AC, that tragic or that horrifying ACL injury or whatever, and that's kind of what he was going for, and with that, so the Vikings kind of, I believe, took a similar route there too, with drafting another Georgia player and drafting another linebacker that the Lions liked later on, but that's a whole nother story. But my point is, I think spite, it kind of rules the actions of Mr. Gutekunst in this draft. And you'll see what I mean, because I don't think it's going to go away anytime soon. I'm sure he's going to have that spiteful stuff with the quarterback that's on his way to the New York Jets in a certain way too. But let's get into this mock draft. So before I started the picks for the mock draft, I actually executed two trades. The first one being the obvious one for the Aaron, uh, for that quarterback who's on their way out to the Jets. And I took my best guess at it. I know the conflict is between whether or not the Packers will deal their number one overall, or that they will get their the Jets first round pick. And I went with no, the Jets win the leverage on that. And the reason, my reasoning for that is because I think the media organizations, the press organizations from the New York City, the largest city in the United States of America, is way more of a pain in the ass than the media outlets, the press outlets of a small city that has like 100,000 people. So you'd be more afraid of the New York media calling for your head as a GM than you would for Green Bay, in my opinion. So that fear, I think, is what leads the Jets to win this game of chicken with them. So as far as the compensation for Aaron Rodgers, I took my best guess. I gave them one of these second round picks, I believe the 43rd one, and then a second and third round from 2024. So it could look like anything. I'm not the biggest expert on that, what the compensation will look like, but that's what I went with. And then, excuse me. And then with that new compensation after that trade, I actually attempted to try to trade up and acquire Jackson Smith and Jigba, but the few times I attempted this mock draft, that wide receiver always went between the eighth pick and the 11th pick, and I didn't believe that the Packers were willing to use their first round pick as part of that trade because they want two first round picks. So I used both of the Packers second round picks as ammunition for that, and it was unsuccessful. So I wouldn't put it past Mr. Gutekunst to try to draft a wide receiver in the first round out of spite of Aaron Rodgers, but unfortunately for him, he was unsuccessful at it. So I do have them trading the two second round picks to move up in the first round of the draft later on, and you'll see what I mean by that. But their first pick, I went with defense, Nolan Smith from Georgia, another Georgia player, but not relevant to what I was talking about earlier with that. And as much as you might expect the Packers to draft a wide receiver in the first round, I think we as humans and as business people are creatures of habit, and Green Bay tends to draft defense in the first round, at least the last several years. Last year, they went with D-line and linebacker. The year before that, a cornerback, and then the year with Stokes. And then the year before that, which I believe would be 2019 or something like that, was edge. So I think it's kind of the edge rushers turn in upgrading the defense, and especially since edge rusher is so deep in this year's class, and it's becoming arguably the most important position on defense. And I think the Packers would want to try to get in on that. And went with Nolan Smith here, who's not the biggest edge rusher, but arguably the quickest, besides Will Anderson Jr. But I think they see this. There's an arms race of linemen going on in the NFC North, and I think they want to try to beat the bigger linemen by with quickness. And I think that's the idea with Nolan Smith, and team captain at Georgia and all that. So probably meshes well with the other two Georgia people they drafted the year before. And now here's where I have the trade up happening with the second round picks, and this is where Mr. Gutekunst's spite comes in against the Detroit Lions, because he's still mad at them for not just the Jameson Williams pick, but for knocking them out of the playoffs last year and being in them twice. So they looked at a player that they believe the Detroit Lions covet and drafted them right in front of them. They traded up to pick 17 with the Steelers, and they drafted, with my mock, Kalijah Cansey. So like I said just a minute ago, they want to try to beat the offensive lineman with quickness, and Cansey is definitely has the quickness to be a effective pass rusher for them. So try to get through and try to beat the lineman the same way Nolan Smith does, with the quickness and with all their pass rushing moves and all that, and being a students of the game and that sort of thing. So that's kind of the theme they're going for their defensive line. And they can't get the wide receiver that they covet, so they double down on the defensive line in that way in the first round. So oh, excuse me, from earlier, it looks like I traded round 1 and round 3 along with that 34 pick for the Aaron Rodgers for that trade. So but they don't have picks in the second round, which is where I would have thought they probably would have addressed tight end, or more likely probably try to draft Keely Ringo as someone Jameson Williams probably had more familiarity with in an attempt at that psychological warfare against him. So if they don't trade those second round picks and try to move up, then those would be the type of players I think they would probably try to get. And my best guess for who they'd want at tight end in the second round would probably be Darnell Washington. But I get the feeling that Darnell Washington's probably going to go early in the second round, maybe even the late first round, depending on which team highly covets his skills. So, but I have them addressing safety, one of their other positions, with their next pick in round 3. That'd be Jamie Robinson. So the Packers decide not to go with Brian Branch in the first round, and they go with one of the other players who would be the next best option. Although it doesn't appear to play slot corner, he does appear to be fast and can track down and stop, players running the ball at the line of scrimmage, and can tackle really well, which is things that Branch is known for. So Robinson is one of the best other safeties, and I know they've met with Jamie Robinson as well. So, and then I believe after that they'll try to get tight end, and they'll probably try to get Tucker Kraft, but he'll be available by the time of their next pick. So I went with the next best one, which was Luke Schoonmaker out of Michigan, who has enough blocking skills and has enough size for the position that for why they would want him there. So a lot of the other tight ends were already off the board because they went pretty much in the second round. So I went with this tight end, whom I know that the Packers met with also, because I tried to look into that. So, and I'm just going to say this right now about the day 3 picks. I put minimal effort in just because only God knows what the heck is going to happen during day 3, during picks 4 through 7. But I did find out that the Packers have a lot of 7th round and like a lot of day 3 picks, a few compensatory excuse me, can't talk today. Compensatory picks and that sort of thing. I did trade a lot of them to move up in the round later on, just because, screw it. And then because they didn't get Jackson Smith Najigba, I got them drafting this guy, Dante Wyvion Wicks out of Virginia. I literally just kind of browsed through on the PFF, the wide receivers, and looked at the trends and saw which ones the Packers were like the highest percentage and likely in drafting him. And this guy was apparently one of the ones that was there. I honestly don't know much about him, and that's my criteria for that. So moving on, the Packers did scout this guy, or they met with this guy, Antonio Maffi, another player that the Lions covet. And when I did the research based on who they were meeting with and who the Lions were meeting with, I noticed there were a lot of the same players, like all throughout the different rounds of the draft, which I thought was interesting, and probably just because of close proximity for where a lot of these players played. Like teams from Northwestern or from, let's say, Iowa State, for example. Like they're more likely to meet with the closer teams, like Green Bay and like Detroit, as opposed to like traveling all the way down to Phoenix or to one of the Florida teams. So, well, even though this guy's played in first school in California, but they're trying to address. Looks like they're trying to address the offensive line depth with this pick there, and then for the final pick, this is the one where I traded up the 4-7 round picks to get back up there because screw it. Ben Sims, tight end of Baylor, they double up on tight end. This was somebody they have met with already, and this was somebody also that was the highest percent of trends on PFF for Packers drafting this player. So, yeah, not much to say about him because I don't know much about him either. So, but yeah, that was the last pick I had. So, very crude, casual football fan type of draft, but in general, I do. It probably won't look too much like that, but there were a few things I learned about the Packers when I did try to research them, as I kind of alluded to before. They're searching through all the best tight ends to try to upgrade that position, and it looks like they really covet Jackson Smith-Njigba because they haven't met with any other wide receivers, as far as I could tell. And I do expect Mr. Gutekunst to draft in a spiteful way and draft in a way where they can sabotage their NFC North rivals. And I do believe he's still going to try to, address defense in the first round. Only this time with like edge rushers and that sort of thing. Because, they're overdue for that. So like next year, they'll probably address cornerback again. And then the year after that, they'll probably try to address linebacker again. And it'll be like a rotating thing. But, and then as far as Aaron Rodgers, I can't believe I said his name again. As far as that trade goes, it could go either way. My guess is the Jets are going to win the leverage part of it and not have to trade a first round pick as part of him for the reasons I said, because New York is less forgiving for failures as opposed to Green Bay, as I alluded to with the media there. So that's just me trying to think outside the box with that. But I do think the Packers are going to try to do something that the Lions will not like at some point in this draft. And I'm just, preparing for it as best as I can, because I know we like to talk about our own teams and who we want to draft and kind of keep the conversation simple in that way. But a big factor in these drafts is what the other teams are going to do with trying to trade up or trade down, or trying to pick the players that the other team wanted. And I would not be surprised if something like that happened with Green Bay there. So I'm going to do another one at some point soon about the Chicago Bears as well as the Minnesota Vikings. And then I'll do one more Lions mock draft with my final predictions for who the Lions will draft there. And then at some point, I did go to that last game of the season where the Lions beat Green Bay, and they were both out of the playoffs in that. And I'll do a video on my experiences from that game sometime down the road. But that's all I have for you guys now. Let me know your thoughts, opinions, and that sort of thing. Does anything I said make sense in there? Feel free to let me know. But yeah, go Lions, one pride.